we're going to move on to our last discussion panel. Jose, please let us connect. We're going to provide some final food for thought and then close with this wonderful morning on design, which is what has gathered us here today. Thank you to all the attendees, officers, NCOs, and the other officers here with us. Again, Dr. Ruben Useche, Director of the Colombian Diplomatic Academy. Here we have General Campo, and all those who are with us through their social networks or AOD Connect 2021. You can enter the website of Archipelago of Design and see many other design experiences. AOD, the center of gravity of AOD is precisely design thinking. And what we've heard today is all related to this methodology. It's a methodology that, as you can see, has been adapted, has been taken, used eclectically by different countries. Colombia has done so. We've said so. Colombia, through the Damascus Doctrine, has taken that eclectically, because we're not only looking at the U.S. Army, but other armies too, including Canada. And that is why when they talk about this methodology, we understand what they're talking about. The Colombian Army very well knew the military process for decision-making. No, in the Air Force, perhaps they applied it too. But the art of operational design is that theory of military sciences that was like living a vacuum that connects operational and strategic levels. That's what we've been talking about this morning. So, Jose, are we ready yet? Good. Would seem we're done. We're ready. Thank you. I'm going to ask Daniel to help us out with the translation. So we can understand each other.
Bien.
I wanted to recap on some things that you said. I'm going to talk slowly so that you can translate and resume some thoughts that you may have expressed. And
algo que me impactó mucho.
I want to take something from Ofra that really impacted me.
Bueno, Ofra siempre dice cosas que me impactan.
She always says some things that impact me.
I'm going to leave it to the translator on stage, Ofra. Thank you.
Estratégica, cognitiva y moral.
But she talks about a cognitive, a strategic,
y moral.
And moral fatigue.
Entonces les quiero poner este pensamiento. Cuando hay fatiga estratégica, cognitiva y moral, hay una suerte de miopía estratégica.
When there's these types of fatigues, there's like a blindness, like an objective.
Miopía estratégica.
A strategic blindness. Uh-huh.
La pregunta es, o el tema de discusión es, ¿hace falta diseño ahí para que no haya esa fatiga?
is there a lack of design in that fatigue, in these types of fatigues?
Y denme una idea de cómo aplicarlo en esa fatiga estratégica, cognitiva y moral que plantea Ofra.
And if you can please elaborate an idea of how you can fix these types of fatigues.
Bueno, ¿quién quisiera empezar? ¿Ofra o...? ¿Sí? ¿Quién? Ok, bueno, parece que no se anima Michelle ni Grant. Entonces, Ofra, por favor.
Maybe.
You want me to offer one?
No, go ahead, Grant.
I would say probably not in terms of moral fatigue, but I think that's more cultural and a lack of sense of purpose and other areas. But for intellectual fatigue, I would say personally the inability to do design is to me a sign of the lack of a foundation, an intellectual foundation that would potentially lead to intellectual fatigue. And I see that many times when we get together and start talking about things in the military. We talk about concepts, and we get people arguing over what unconventional warfare means for hours and sometimes days, and nobody ever agrees. And to me, that's a sign of intellectual fatigue, because we can't accept new words. It's very difficult sometimes to accept new words or define things differently. So there's this inability to think outside of the box. And I think when you don't have that foundation, that intellectual foundation, then it does, to do design, it does lead to this intellectual fatigue. And I see it a lot.
Thank you, Grant. Ofra, please.
Well, I used two sets of words in the morning. One was weakness, and the second one was fatigue. I used weakness when I talked about the institutions and organizations, and I think weakness has to do with an organization or an institution that doesn't change and thus becomes irrelevant, and thus it is weak. When I use the word fatigue, which is a description of a situation, for me, what's behind it is that people are either depressed because things are not going on as they expected, or based on our conversation in the morning, people are bored, aburrido. So if they're bored, what's the point of doing so? No need to do anything. There are all kinds of reasons why we are fatigued and why we suffer from fatigue, why we don't have the energy to do things. And for me, design, I'm really glad. I didn't know what my colleagues were going to talk about. I only knew the headlines. And what I like about the archipelago of design is that we presented four entirely different views. I disagree with many, many things that I've heard, but this is coming from me as an Israeli doing design. Michele, thank you. I appreciate it. And the same with Greer and some of the things that Grant said as well. Why am I mentioning it? Because for me, design, and that's why I think design cannot reside in doctrine. Yes, it is to go beyond doctrine. Design is about rattling. Grant, Michele, can you think of the word in Spanish, rattle, to shake? It's about shaking. It's about shaking your mind. It's about shaking the organization. It's about shaking the world. So I guess if that's your mind state, there is some adrenaline, there is some sense of energy that will prevent you from being fatigued. If you're bored or if you're depressed, then it's very easy to. So this is my opinion. I mean, if you don't proactively shake and rattle what you do, even either because you're curious about something or just for the sake, as Jim said, just for the sake of the exercise. You know, if we don't exercise, just physical exercise, physical training, PT, if we don't do it for a couple of days, then it's easier not to do it. So, but fatigue is a big problem. I didn't just, I made it up yesterday, all these issues about fatigue, and I think that's the greatest problem that we have right now in the West.
If I might, may I respond a bit as well?
Sí, por favor, Michelle. Sí. Adelante.
Quiero responder en inglés, si está bien. No
sí, está bien en inglés.
So I think I agree with Ofra. You know, I do actually agree with Ofra on many things. But I think, and I agree on this part as well, but I think the fatigue part also comes from an increased polarization of views. That is something that we're seeing more and more in today's political world, in the political decisions that we make, and in the messaging that is created through this. So that fatigue, it's not just fatigue, I think it's fatigue and a willful blindness to the complexity and the nuances of different problems. Again, this is not at the strategic decision-making level of the military, but rather at the political level and societal decision-making level. And the reason why is we're seeing more and more in the elections that we have, the political leadership that we have, is the taking of two opposite polarized positions, and the messaging addresses that, and the nuance, the details of the discussion are not presented, and in fact they're ignored, right? And so I agree with Ofra, the need to shake and to rattle, agitar la situación, is very important. But the reason why it's important, and the reason why the AOD is good at this, is because we use that to talk about the nuances, right? To talk about the disagreements that we have, and we see the benefit in the disagreements. Whereas at other levels of society, those disagreements, you're not supposed to engage in the nuance with the other side. Right, doing so admits defeat, and so that I think is also part of the problem, and it adds to the fatigue. I don't know if that makes sense, but I think it's fatigue and this kind of increased polarization in discourse.
Excelente.
Excellent. Yes. I was reading the title of our symposium here. Strategic thinking is the main title, and definitely today, yes or yes. The armed services or armed forces from any country, small, big, medium countries, everyone, all the states need to have the strategic thinking. They need to change their mindsets. They need old soldiers with new ideas. Because there is always a resilience to change, and there is always a resilience to change the mindset or the old practices. But today, what AOD is proposing to us is that we need to dare to change our thinking. And we are only going to be able to do it with different tips given by them during the morning. Critical and creative thinking. I love what Colonel Greer mentioned about the teams. I want him to maybe tell us something about the design. And I quote, he said, "You teach design, preparing design groups." Design is taught, preparing design groups, given to them complex problems.
Coronel Rojas is highlighting the title of this event, and he highlights that we need this type of design, a strategical design, We need old soldiers with new ideas. And specifically for Grant, you have a phrase that design builds teams of design.
Sí. Greer, Coronel Greer.
Jim Greer. I'm
Jim
sorry,
Greer.
Jim Greer. Sorry.
Sí.
And Coronel wants to.
El diseño se enseña preparando grupos de diseño.
The design
Se enseña
it's taught by groups of design.
Y dándoles problemas complejos.
And giving them complex problems.
¿Cómo lo hacen en SAMS y cómo lo hacen? Cuéntenos algo de su experiencia.
How do they do it in SAMS, and can you tell us more about that experience?
So, Colonel Greer had to leave, but I can offer you my experience, and then I've talked to people who have gone through SAMS after me. And the way they did it for me was they taught us a lot of concepts, some of the philosophy behind design thinking, systems thinking, emergence theory, complex adaptive systems theory, all these different theories. And then they taught us a few different types of tools that these theorists have developed into tools for practitioners to use, or tools that practitioners have come up with based on the theories. And we played with the tools, and then they gave us a military problem that we then had to think very critically about. And I think when I went through, it was 2009, and the Afghanistan surge was taking place. We were putting more troops into Afghanistan, and we were having a very big problem with the logistics for Afghanistan, because our logistics through Pakistan were being upheld, stopped, or raided. And so we were basically given a logistics problem, but it had lots of political overtones. And so that was the problem that we used to practice some of our design tools on. And then once we did design and tried to grapple with what is the logic of the system, what's the problem, then we went into the military decision-making process. So that was how we did it. And that's pretty much how I've seen it usually done. Trying to get the teams of students to not just focus on the military problem, but understand the entire situation.
Excelente. Hace poco.
Recently, we heard in the media what occurred in Afghanistan with the withdrawal of the United States troops. And I'm not going to ask you anything to Grant, because I don't want to get him into trouble. But I would like Ofra. Ofra, can you tell us what's your idea, your thoughts from Israel perspective, the abrupt withdrawal, risky, with a lot of disorder, blind, strategically talking, very criticized by all the powers. What do you think? What's your opinion about it? And it was design missing there? Because when I met SAMS for the first time, I remember a quote they used to say, a SAMS teacher, a SAMS professor, when the United States goes to war, takes aircraft carriers, aircrafts, but the President of the United States asks, and where are the SAMS? I don't know. Do you think that the SAMS weren't present there in that planning? Grant, not for Grant. That's not for Grant. Ofra is for you.
I think I have, as Israeli, I have the privilege, or Israel had the privilege of not participating in the war in Afghanistan, at least to the best of my knowledge. And even the Canadian Armed Forces obviously were part of it. So what I'm going to say, and the fact that I brought this up this morning is an example of weakness and fatigue. The withdrawal and the way the withdrawal took place from Afghanistan, it's because, for three reasons. First reason, it's because the U.S. is the empire identified with Afghanistan and the honest and sincere attempt to transform Afghanistan into a democratic country. And for a period of time, for a couple of years, it has been transformed. So first of all, I think all of us are looking this question whether people can change, societies can change, countries can change, transform to a better state. I think now we have one answer where it not just didn't work, but it crumbled. So what country will take in the future this initiative to go and help those who are in need, and to do it in light of Western values? So this is one concern, and it doesn't have to do with design. It is an existential question, and I think the U.S. for many, many years served an example of willing to send soldiers and willing to sacrifice lives for values, to protect values. So this is one concern. The second concern is the failure of understanding. Now, since understanding is part, from an Israeli SOD perspective, understanding is part of our model of design. If there was a failure of understanding the system, the situation, the potential and the timing, then yes, it is a failure of design. And the third reason that I'm mentioning the withdrawal from Afghanistan is that I think, again, because of the fatigue, all the militaries in the world need to reevaluate their role in policy. I think Grant was mentioning it more than once. You can do design as good as you do, but if you don't have the politician's ear and there is no discourse with the politician as to what they do, because the decision to withdraw from Afghanistan was already made by the former president, Donald Trump, which held totally different views, opposite views about the world, about how to apply force. And at the end of the day, the timing fell with President Biden, but the military is the same military. So why did it fail so miserably? And it's not, obviously, it's not a US problem. It's all the militaries who were part of this event. I don't see it happening again. And by the way, Israel, we have our history. We abandoned the Lebanese, the Christian Lebanese militias when we left Lebanon in 2000. We did the same. We did it abruptly. We did it overnight for a tactical reason. We didn't notify them. We didn't give them time to organize. And since Israel and Lebanon, it's a very compact situation, they were just running. They were throwing themselves at the border, not from the planes, but at the border, and asking to be let into Israel. So we did the same. But the West did the same to the Kurds in the civil war in Syria. We keep doing that. So I think for medium-sized states and for small states, going back to the question about nuclear capabilities of Israel, we need to preserve the capability to defend ourselves, because when we get outside help, one day they may come out, withdraw, and we'll be left with our own mierda.
Ofra, you're right. Yeah. I was remembering right now that Colombia military forces by 2011 used the systemic operational design in some reviewing committed strategic innovation to transform the forces. I remember the systemic operational design is doctrine done by one general from Israel, Zimunab, Ofra, 20 years working for him or with him. The most important student, now she's over him, went over him. But no, the idea is to let you know that the systemic operational design allowed us to analyze FARC as a system by systems. A political system, economic, military, or arm. But what matters is to understand the importance of using all these theories, doctrines, and how we apply them here. AOD core at Archipelago is the design thinking. And I like how Michele put us today to think with the organic design. Michele, I understand that you're still testing it, no? Is that right? You're just testing it? Yes, it's a continuous project, yeah. I remember that after Vietnam, I hope Grant can understand me. After Vietnam, the United States Army organizes their own doctrine, and when they are going to the first war at the Gulf, they use the air-land battle. That was their premiere. When it's going to be the organic design premiere in Canada, when you think that's going to occur, understanding that there is an institutional crisis. Yes, I think that the project so far that we are right now expecting to end it, it's going to be a 3 years project. This is the first year. We still have 2 more. And as I said, the research from the ground, from the bases. But we have the support of one general. And he is in a very strategic point, and he believes a lot in the part of design, and there are other generals sponsoring that with the same opinion. And we are aware that we are right now in a lot of change, I would say a crisis in the Canadian armed services that are going to have an influence, I believe. That's going to have an influence in the method we're going to develop. Right now, they are affecting the army model, or in general, the armed forces, and how the leadership is going to be developed. And the crisis is that many generals and admirals are out of their position due to sexual harassment, sexual abuse. So,
and this was like a domino effect. So one started falling, the others fell right after him. So there's no secret to anyone. It's all across the Canadian newspapers. So that will have quite an impact on decisions and the way of being a leader and how the armed forces are going to be organized in the coming years. So I think these next 3 years are going to be critical. We hope we can have some influence on how we can do the design and strategic thinking, but as a whole, we have yet to see how it will be shaped. And this is also important. At a political level, and society wants to exert an influence on how military training is done in the future. So we were going to be dealing with this Okay, thank you, Michele. That is very tough what you just told us. I mean, at least I didn't know. Just one final question, because we're getting to the end of this event. For you guys to give us a very short answer, please. So this is going to be a disruptive one. I want all you three, I understand Colonel Greer is not with us anymore, but if you could give us a recommendation to Colombian generals on how to think strategically on design application. If you had the possibility of having one of the highest ranking generals in the military forces in Colombia, what would you tell them? And second, what thought would you want to leave for the new generations to think strategically? So the old soldiers, the generals, the colonels, and what for the new generations? If you were facing them right now, what would you tell them with respect to strategic thinking and design? Let us start with Grant.
Colonel Rojas wants you to make a recommendation on two people. The first being the older generals that are high at the top of how to think strategic, how to think of design, how to apply design, strategic design to the ongoing operations right now, first of all. And then the second is, what would you recommend to those officials, soldiers that are instructing themselves in strategic design right now, the younger ones, the younger generations? Basically, those two recommendations to those two types of officers. Colonel, thank you.
Two short answers. The first question, I would recommend experimentation. So we have in the U.S. sometimes used the military decision-making process, design, and some other methods on one problem. I don't think we do it enough. I would recommend doing that every year, at least once, maybe 2 or 3 times a year. Give generals or units, commanders, problems during training that you can maybe simulate, and let different groups try different things and see what happens, and publish the results, and just keep experimenting, getting used to different ways of doing things, but then look at what happened and try to see, well, maybe this method worked better than the other method. And never relax, never be comfortable with what the conclusions are of one experiment. So that would be the first thing. The second thing I would say is, I think the military should look into the subject of public administration. Now, I am biased because that's what I study. But public administration is about executing policy. And there's a very big tension in the public administration world over how do we know whether we are being effective. And I think the military struggles with that question every day. How do we know we are being effective? And public administration studies are trying to answer that question. I think the military could learn a lot from what they are trying to learn.
Thank you, Grant. So we're going to leave Ofra last. So that means it's your turn, dear Michele. Choose your language. Apologize for this double effort. I would say first to the generals and the higher ranking officers. First, Think about your understanding of the world, your cosmic vision, how do you understand the world operates now. I would propose to think about how wrong they are about that. I mean, how that understanding that they think they have could be wrong or could be incorrect somehow. To start practicing this thinking that there's always something ambiguous that may not be understood. So where are our errors? Where are our mistakes? And also something that we are doing in our study, what do these guys from our lower ranks, lower level know that you don't? So always keep these questions up in the air to see whether we can help expand knowledge. And I can say that these recommendations can apply not only to generals, but any group.
So I would say my two recommendations are picture your understanding of the world and your assumptions of the world. And now I challenge you to think of how they're wrong. Okay. What don't you understand? What are you missing? Why might your assumptions be wrong? So just to kind of keep that intellectual humility and understanding of the ambiguity of the situations you might be going with as an exercise. Obviously, in crisis situations, this might not necessarily be as preferable. And also, one of the things that we're doing in our study is what do those of lower rank know that you don't? And it's just to get that full understanding of various levels of operation, and again, more. In English, we would say increasing your empathic horizon. En español, el punto de pensar de qué piensan los otros de nivel más bajo es para ampliar ese horizonte empático.
Okay.
El pensamiento de los otros y eso. Yeah.
Bueno.
Good. So for reasons of time, we need to stop right now. I want to very specially thank AOD, Dr. Ofra Graicer. You owe us that answer for some other time, but Michele, Grant, Colonel Greer, everyone who was connected and logged in, of course, to our military university, thank you so much. We'll meet you next time, and we'll continue working on these design topics.